At my stepson's wedding, he thanked his real family, took the mic, and introduced me as just mom's husband. I stayed quiet the whole night. But when the bill hit for the venue, I just said, "You didn't do the speech, at least pay for it." His dad laughed and said, "Don't worry. He shouldn't have to acknowledge you." I pulled out the contract and said, I'd already signed something that changed everything. I, 52M, thought I knew what betrayal felt like until my stepson's wedding night. 15 years of raising him, and he introduced me as just mom's husband. The bill came due, and I had my revenge ready. The morning started like any other wedding day should. Sarah bustling around our bedroom, trying on 3 different dresses before settling on the navy blue one I'd bought her last month. I adjusted my tie in the mirror, the same burgundy one I'd worn to every important family event for the past decade. Today was supposed to be different, though. Today, I was finally going to be acknowledged as family. Marcus had been 8 when I married his mother. His biological father had walked out 2 years earlier, leaving Sarah to juggle 2 jobs and a grieving child. I stepped into that chaos willingly, even eagerly. Late-night homework sessions, soccer practices, parent-teacher conferences, I'd done it all. When Marcus broke his arm at 12, I was the one who carried him to the emergency room. When he got his first job at 16, I taught him how to tie a proper necktie. The venue looked spectacular that morning. The country club I'd selected and paid for gleamed in the October sunlight. White roses and baby's breath adorned every table, just like Marcus had requested. The marble floors reflected the chandelier light, creating the elegant atmosphere he'd dreamed of since proposing to Lisa 6 months ago. Everything was perfect, exactly as we'd planned during those long evenings at our kitchen table, going over every detail. Sarah squeezed my hand as we took our seats in the front row. She looked radiant, tears already forming in her eyes as the string quartet began playing. I felt proud watching Marcus adjust his cufflinks at the altar, the same silver ones I'd given him for his 18th birthday. His best man, his college roommate Jake, stood beside him looking slightly nervous but happy. The ceremony proceeded beautifully. Lisa looked stunning in her grandmother's vintage dress, and Marcus couldn't stop smiling. When they exchanged vows, I found myself getting emotional too. This kid I'd helped raise was becoming a man, starting his own family. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and the crowd erupted in applause. During the cocktail hour, everything still felt normal. Guests mingled around the club's terrace, sipping champagne and admiring the fall foliage. Marcus and Lisa moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and posing for pictures. Several times, guests approached me to comment on how well the wedding was organized, how beautiful the venue looked. I accepted their compliments with quiet pride. Sarah and I made small talk with the other guests, mostly Lisa's family and Marcus's college friends. A few of my work colleagues had come, along with our neighbors. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time. The photographer kept pulling family members aside for pictures, and I noticed Marcus hesitating each time I appeared in frame, but I attributed it to typical groom nervousness. Dinner was served promptly at 7. The salmon was perfectly prepared. The wine I'd selected paired beautifully with the meal. Conversations flowed easily around our table. Sarah kept reaching over to squeeze my hand, whispering how proud she was of how everything had turned out. I felt genuinely happy, satisfied that months of planning had created this perfect evening for Marcus and Lisa. Then came the speeches. The best man went first, telling embarrassing college stories that had everyone laughing. Lisa's father spoke beautifully about welcoming Marcus into their family, about watching his daughter find true love. Then Marcus stood up, tapping his champagne glass with his fork. He started by thanking everyone for coming, for celebrating this special day with him and Lisa. He talked about how lucky he felt, how grateful he was for all the love and support. Then he began acknowledging family members. First, he thanked Lisa's parents for raising such an incredible daughter and for welcoming him with open arms. The crowd murmured their approval. Next, he turned toward our table, and I straightened in my chair, expecting my moment. Instead, Marcus looked directly at his mother and said he wanted to thank his real family for everything they'd done for him. He talked about Sarah's strength, her sacrifices, how she'd been both mother and father to him when times were tough. The crowd nodded appreciatively, and I felt my chest tighten slightly, but I assumed he was building up to including me. Then came the blow that knocked the wind out of me. Marcus gestured toward me and told the crowd he also wanted to acknowledge Mom's husband, who'd helped with some of the wedding expenses. Just Mom's husband. Not his stepfather. Not the man who'd raised him. Not family. Just an obligation to mention because I'd written some checks. The room fell silent for a moment before polite applause followed. I felt every eye in that reception hall turn toward me, measuring my reaction. Sarah's hand found mine under the table, her grip tight with shock and embarrassment. I managed to keep my expression neutral, even forced a small smile, and raised my glass slightly when people looked my way. But inside, I was crumbling. 15 years of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, graduation ceremonies, all reduced to being Mom's husband who helped with expenses. 15 years of being there when his real father wasn't, and I'd been demoted to a footnote in his life story. Marcus continued his speech, thanking various friends and relatives, his voice growing more emotional as he talked about the people who'd shaped him into the man he'd become. Not once did he look in my direction again. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, and people began approaching him with congratulations on his beautiful words. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment to collect myself. In the mirror, I saw a man who'd just been publicly humiliated at an event he'd largely funded. My burgundy tie suddenly felt like it was strangling me. I loosened it slightly and took several deep breaths, trying to process what had just happened. When I returned to the table, Sarah immediately leaned over to whisper that she couldn't believe what Marcus had done, that she was mortified and would talk to him immediately. I told her not to make a scene, that we'd discuss it later. The last thing I wanted was to ruin the reception with family drama. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The first dance, the cake cutting, the bouquet toss. I participated mechanically in all the traditional moments, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. Several guests approached me throughout the night, some offering subtle sympathy, others seeming genuinely confused about Marcus's speech. I deflected their comments with vague responses, not wanting to air family grievances at his wedding. Around 11, as the reception was winding down, the club manager approached me discreetly with the final bill. The amount was substantial, nearly $40,000 for the venue, catering, bar service, flowers, and music. I'd known this day would come, had budgeted for it carefully over the past year. What I hadn't anticipated was how different this moment would feel after Marcus's speech. I asked the manager to present the bill to Marcus, explaining that as the groom, he should handle the final details. The manager looked confused but agreed to redirect the paperwork. Within minutes, I watched from across the room as Marcus's face went pale while reviewing the charges. He walked over to our table, his new wife trailing behind looking concerned. Marcus asked if there had been some mistake with the billing, that surely the club had mixed up their paperwork. I told him there was no mistake, that this was indeed the cost of his wedding reception. Marcus stammered that he'd assumed I was handling all the financial aspects, as we discussed during the planning process. I reminded him that during those planning sessions, I'd been treated as family, as his stepfather who was proud to contribute to his special day. I explained that our original arrangement had been based on me being acknowledged as such. The color drained completely from his face as he began to understand where this conversation was heading. Lisa looked back and forth between us, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding the source. Other family members were beginning to notice our intense discussion. Marcus asked what I meant, though I could see in his eyes that he already knew. I explained calmly that his speech had made our relationship very clear. I was just Mom's husband, someone who helped with expenses. I told him that since he'd chosen to define our relationship in purely transactional terms, I was comfortable operating within those boundaries. Sarah tried to intervene, saying this wasn't the time or place for this conversation, that we should discuss it privately at home. I agreed that it wasn't the ideal setting, but pointed out that Marcus had chosen a public forum to define our relationship, so it seemed appropriate to clarify the financial implications publicly as well. Marcus's voice rose slightly as he insisted that he'd never intended to hurt me, that the speech was just about acknowledging his biological family. I asked him why I hadn't been included in that category after 15 years of acting as his father in every meaningful way except genetically. That's when Lisa's father approached our group, having noticed the growing tension. He asked if everything was all right, if there was anything he could do to help resolve whatever issue had arisen. Marcus quickly explained that there seemed to be a misunderstanding about the bill, that his stepfather was suddenly refusing to pay for the reception. Lisa's father looked genuinely shocked, asking why the groom's family was having financial disputes at the wedding reception. I clarified that I wasn't refusing to pay. I was simply expecting Marcus to pay for his own wedding, as most adults do. I explained that my original offer to cover expenses had been made as his father figure, a role he publicly rejected that very evening. The conversation was drawing more attention now. Jake, the best man, had walked over, along with several other wedding guests. The situation was becoming exactly the kind of scene I'd hoped to avoid, but Marcus's panic was making him louder and more desperate. Marcus pleaded with me to reconsider, saying he couldn't possibly afford the full cost of the reception on his teacher's salary. I acknowledged that it was indeed expensive, which was why I'd originally planned to cover it as a wedding gift from a proud father to his son. I reminded him that his speech had made clear I wasn't his father, just Mom's husband who sometimes helped with expenses. That's when Marcus's biological father, who'd shown up unexpectedly during the reception, inserted himself into the conversation. He'd been absent for most of Marcus's life, but had somehow felt entitled to attend the wedding. Now he was laughing, actually laughing, as he told me not to worry about it, that Marcus shouldn't have to acknowledge someone who wasn't really family. The audacity of this man, who'd abandoned his son and contributed nothing to his upbringing, telling me that I wasn't family was the final straw. But instead of exploding, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. I explained to the gathered crowd that I'd actually signed something earlier that month that had changed everything. Marcus asked what I was talking about, his voice now shaky with panic. I unfolded the papers and showed him the contract I'd signed with my lawyer. The document was a formal adoption agreement. For months, I'd been working with an attorney to legally adopt Marcus, even at his age, as a surprise wedding gift. The paperwork would have made me his legal father in every sense, not just the man who'd raised him. I'd planned to present it to him during a private moment at the reception, a symbolic gesture to formalize what I'd felt was already true. But his speech had changed my mind about filing those papers. Instead, I'd spent the last hour of the reception on my phone with my lawyer, explaining that I wanted to withdraw the adoption petition immediately. The document I was holding was the withdrawal notice, officially abandoning my attempt to become Marcus's legal father. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the papers, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and devastation. Sarah began crying, understanding immediately what this meant. Lisa looked between her new husband and the document, trying to piece together what was happening. Marcus's biological father stopped laughing, suddenly realizing that his dismissive comment had just cost his son a significant financial and emotional support system. He tried to backtrack, saying he'd just been joking, that of course I was family. I told him he was absolutely right the first time. Marcus didn't need to acknowledge me, and I didn't need to act like his father anymore. I stood up from the table and addressed Marcus directly, my voice steady despite the emotional earthquake happening inside me. I told him that I'd spent 15 years trying to earn a place in his family, trying to be the father his biological father had chosen not to be. I explained that his speech had finally given me clarity about where I actually stood in his life. Marcus tried to apologize, saying he'd made a mistake, that he'd been nervous and hadn't thought through his words carefully. I acknowledged that we all make mistakes, but pointed out that his mistake had revealed his true feelings. I told him that after 15 years, those feelings weren't likely to change because of one difficult conversation. I handed the club manager my credit card and paid for the drinks and music, explaining that as someone who'd helped with expenses, I felt obligated to cover the parts of the evening that had already been consumed. However, I told Marcus that the venue rental, catering, and remaining services were his responsibility as the groom. The venue charges alone were nearly $30,000. Marcus looked at the bill with complete panic, asking how he was supposed to pay for something he couldn't afford. I suggested he might want to ask his real family for help, since they were the only ones he'd acknowledged in his speech. Sarah tried one more time to convince me to reconsider, saying that Marcus had learned his lesson and would never make such a hurtful mistake again. I told her that some lessons come with expensive price tags, and this appeared to be one of them. Marcus's biological father, suddenly faced with the prospect of having to contribute financially, began making excuses about his own financial situation, how he couldn't possibly help with such a large expense. The man who'd just finished telling me that Marcus didn't need to acknowledge me was now explaining why he couldn't step up to fill the void he'd helped create. Lisa's parents offered to help with what they could, but it was clear they couldn't cover the full amount either. The club manager, growing impatient with the drama, reminded everyone that the charges needed to be resolved before the venue could be released for the evening. In the end, Marcus had to call his credit card companies and take cash advances to cover the immediate costs, putting himself into serious debt for his wedding reception. His biological father slipped out during the confusion, apparently having somewhere more important to be. Several guests began leaving as well, uncomfortable with the family drama that had erupted. Sarah rode home with me in silence, both of us processing what had happened. She finally asked if I was really going to withdraw the adoption papers, and I told her that ship had sailed the moment Marcus chose to publicly diminish our relationship. She argued that he was young and had made an impulsive mistake, that 15 years of love and dedication couldn't be erased by one thoughtless speech. But I explained that it wasn't just one speech. It was the culmination of years of subtle signals that I'd chosen to ignore. The way he introduced me to his college friends as his mom's husband. How he never called me dad, even in private moments. The way he structured his life to minimize my role in his important milestones. Sarah cried most of the way home, torn between her loyalty to her son and her recognition that what he'd done was unforgivable. I felt emotionally drained but strangely relieved. For the first time in 15 years, I had clarity about my place in this family dynamic. Update 1. 3 weeks have passed since the wedding, and the fallout has been significant. Marcus has called several times, sometimes angry, sometimes tearful, asking me to reconsider my decision. He's insisted that he never meant to hurt me, that his speech was just poorly worded nervousness. I've listened to his explanations, but my position hasn't changed. I've told him that his speech simply revealed feelings he'd been hiding for years, and that I'm actually grateful for the honesty, even if it was unintentional. The financial impact on Marcus has been severe. The wedding debt has forced him and Lisa to move in with her parents temporarily, and they've had to cancel their honeymoon. Marcus's teaching salary simply can't handle the unexpected $30,000 burden, especially with the high interest rates on the cash advances he had to take. Sarah has been caught in the middle, trying to maintain relationships with both of us. She suggested family therapy, mediation, anything to repair the damage. But I've explained that this isn't about anger or revenge. It's about accepting reality and adjusting my expectations accordingly. Marcus's biological father has been notably absent from all attempts to resolve the situation. After his performance at the wedding, he's apparently decided that his son's problems aren't his concern after all. The man who insisted Marcus didn't need to acknowledge me has shown no interest in stepping up to fill the role he claimed was unnecessary. Update 2. 2 months after the wedding, the consequences of that night continue to ripple through our family. Marcus and Lisa's marriage is already showing strain under the financial pressure and family drama. Lisa has been cold toward me at family gatherings, clearly blaming me for their current difficulties. Marcus has started working a second job on weekends, tutoring high school students to help pay down the wedding debt. The stress has been visible. He's lost weight, looks constantly tired, and has developed a short temper that's affecting his relationships with everyone around him. Sarah finally asked me directly if I missed him, if I regretted my decision to withdraw the adoption papers. I told her honestly that I missed the version of Marcus I thought existed, the son who loved and respected me enough to claim me as family. But that person had apparently been a fiction I'd created in my own mind. The most difficult part has been watching Sarah struggle with divided loyalties. She's angry at Marcus for his speech, but heartbroken about the destruction of our family unit. She's asked me several times if there's anything Marcus could do to earn back my trust and financial support. I've been honest with her. At this point, it's not about what Marcus does or doesn't do. It's about me finally accepting who he really is and adjusting my role accordingly. I've spent 15 years trying to earn a place in his heart that was apparently never available to me. Update 3. 6 months have passed, and Marcus has finally paid off the wedding debt through his second job and help from Lisa's parents. The experience seems to have changed him. He's more serious now, less entitled, more aware of the cost of his choices. Last month, he showed up at our house unannounced and asked to speak with me privately. He said he'd had months to think about what happened, to really examine his feelings and motivations. He admitted that his speech wasn't just nervousness. It was fear of seeming disloyal to his biological father, who'd unexpectedly decided to attend the wedding. Marcus explained that he'd spent years feeling guilty about loving me as a father figure, worried that it somehow betrayed his biological father's memory. He'd convinced himself that maintaining emotional distance was the right thing to do, even though it hurt both of us. I listened to his explanation without interrupting, then asked him why it had taken a financial crisis for him to have this revelation. He didn't have a good answer for that. He asked if there was any chance I'd consider refiling the adoption papers, if we could find a way to repair our relationship. I told him that the adoption had been a gift I'd wanted to give him, not something he could earn back through good behavior after the fact. The trust and unconditional love I'd felt for him had been damaged in a way that couldn't be easily repaired. I explained that I'd always care about him and want him to be happy, but our relationship would never be the same as it was before his wedding speech. Marcus cried during that conversation, and I felt genuinely sorry for him. But I also felt at peace with my decision. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is accept reality rather than continuing to chase an impossible dream. Sarah and I are doing well. Our marriage has actually grown stronger through this crisis, and we've both gained clarity about boundaries and expectations. I still attend family gatherings when Marcus is there, but our interactions are polite and distant. He's Mom's son, and I'm Mom's husband, just as he defined it that night. The withdrawal of the adoption papers remains filed, and I have no plans to change that decision. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. They can only be accepted as permanent landmarks in the geography of our relationships. Marcus learned an expensive lesson about the weight of words and the cost of taking love for granted. I learned an equally valuable lesson about the importance of accepting people as they show themselves to be, rather than as I wish they were. In the end, we're both probably better off for the painful clarity that wedding night provided.